Welcome to AGNT, the podcast for enterprise tech meets the agentic era. I'm Gemma Allen, joined by my co-host Raphael Dornano, broadcasting from the New York Stock Exchange. On every episode, we unpack how intelligent systems are reshaping companies, markets, and the way real work gets done. From Fortune 500 boardrooms to breakout upstarts, we're digging into the strategies, technologies, and people defining the next chapter of AI. Let's get into it. Raphael, welcome back. It has been what feels like a century since you were here because so much has happened. Had a good summer?
Yes, so much has. This summer has been crazy.
Well, the markets have really been crazy, and I know we're all waiting for Jensen to take the mic in a while and see what happens with that NVIDIA. I think a lot is kind of resting on what sort of earnings they have, but let's talk broadly for a second in terms of why this industry is so crazy. And I want to get into a topic which I know is close to your heart, and that is the world of intelligence happening in abundance. And in that model, who truly owns the receipts? Mm-hmm. So you have been writing a lot about the SaaS apocalypse. I know you have been somebody who's been very focused on this for quite a while. And lately, the viewpoint is that, okay, it's not necessarily which model is better. We know models are getting better. We know they're getting cheaper. They're becoming mass available. It's more the question of who owns the relationship, the opportunity after Claude gives you that result, right? Talk me through what you're seeing, what you're thinking, where you think this very nuanced industry is headed.
Right. I think, look, we're a bit more than 6 months into the SaaS apocalypse, which happened in the beginning of the year, and no one has forgotten, right? During this time, intelligence has, as you said, has become abundant and intelligence under all its forms. Open source, closed source is now like an evidence. And I think that the way that the software industry has evolved and what it has become is at a very interesting inflection point. What I mean by that is that I really saw that software was in huge trouble at the beginning of the year, pre-SaaS apocalypse, and I had shared those views with you. Because we were seeing these AI labs, and when I say these AI labs, Anthropic and OpenAI, of course, really trying to build a moat by going upstream from intelligence into becoming this operating system for their clients. And that was their only way of, and is still their only way of escaping a form of commoditization that is now very clear. And so software at that time was in a position where those companies knew they were going to be disrupted quicker than they saw. And what we have seen is kind of like an interesting inflection by which the system of record, which we thought was going to be a database that was going to be just queried by intelligence, is mutating into the most important thing by which the system of record is actually what allows you to build from a very defensible position to use the intelligence that is now abundant by these models and now to own the front end. It's what we've seen with Slack code. It's what we're seeing with Workday and Senna, completely rewiring the interface. And now we're in this new architecture by which some software companies have the proximity to the human intent, are actually capturing intent, are rewiring what needs to be done to whatever form of intelligence exists, Claude, OpenAI, etc., and are going and rewriting to the database that they own because they have the system of record. So they're building this new execution loop, which they have the entry point, they have the system of record. And I'm not saying all software. I'm saying the companies that have the systems of records that are building this new front end, which is exactly like Claude and ChatGPT being the front end, the UI of AI. We're not there yet. I'm not saying that this is solved. I'm not saying that software is completely back. I'm saying we're at a very interesting point by which these incumbents have moved very fast with a position that is very defensible. If they're able to evolve their business model and to capture the economics of this new architecture reality, we may be assisting to something that is very interesting over the next months.
So what does capturing the economics of this artificial reality look like, though, right? Let's take Slack Code as an example, okay? A lot of folks, I mean, it's obviously owned by Salesforce. Salesforce had a shaky year across the board, as have many of its, peers.
Right.
This idea that, usage-based licensing, seat-based licensing is kind of in somewhat of a paradox. Salesforce, the company, has Agentforce. It has Tableau, great product too. But again, it's like one potential solution for one part of the business, which is very much the communication side of that business, right? Competing with Microsoft Teams or whoever. Microsoft Teams has Copilot.
Right.
Like, if we were to really, kind of like boil this down, like, give me an example of who you think is defensible, like who you think is doing this well, like where you see an opportunity for a stock to bounce back, perhaps, because again, there has been somewhat of a laggard response to the cannibalization that has been, presented to us through the likes of Anthropic, and I wouldn't really say OpenAI to the same extent in enterprise, but it's certainly there, right?
Look, I think you're raising a very important point on insisting on the economics part, and I would start to say by underlying that most of these software companies are still reasoning in terms of seats. At some point, and when I say at some point, I mean now, we need to acknowledge that this is not the right unit anymore. I think this is point number one. We have acknowledged that the UI is not what it used to be, and the UI has changed. So that's what's being done with Slack code Slack, sorry. This is what is being done with Microsoft now using Copilot as the interface, which I think is interesting. So this is okay. Now, from a seat perspective, if you believe in agents delivering tremendous value and capturing work, hence the 30 trillion TAM that raised many questions from Anthropic's IPO. Right? I don't know if you heard this yesterday.
Yes.
Like SpaceX 20-something, Anthropic's 30 billion. So if we believe in that, we believe that agents are going to be completing work that was previously completed by humans. So if you follow the logic, the more this gets successful, the less you have seats. So companies that are billing per seats are naturally on a declining path. That's normal. So software companies today, the way that they're attaching consumption, they're still attaching consumption to seed revenue. So when you see, oh, this company has a lot of consumption, this company has great growth in agents, and you dig into this, you can see that it's still linked to the seed. So I think the next act that we need to put forward is that we need to see a decoupling from effective consumption, which will prove that agentic AI is working big time, from seats, and accept not to have seats go down, but to rebase, I like this term, the seed revenue naturally. So I think this is where everyone is kind of stuck right now. I'll give you an example. If you look at Senna and Workday, Senna is really interesting. And I think that maybe one of the reasons for a potential take private, if that goes through with Silver Lake, is that Workday would effectively be a very different company if Senna effectively became that new interface, agentic AI compliant, I would say. But when you look at the cross-sell, at the number of users that are using Workday, the ones that are effectively using Senna, that rate is actually pretty low, from my understanding. So we're not there yet. We're seeing a lot of burgeoning signs, but this is a race that is on. What I do not like is companies that are showing a ton of AI ARR, because that's what's the most fashionable right now, but that have not changed their architecture, meaning they have not captured this user intent, the proximity to user intent. They're not, they don't have a system of record that is a defensible entry point. So they're still at the core of the SaaS apocalypse, and this has only gotten worse, just to be clear. Like the SaaS apocalypse, with the threat that existed at the beginning of the year, is even bigger right now. So some companies are in the course of transformation. I mean Workday, Microsoft, Salesforce, which is doing amazing work with the announcements that we had from Headless 360, Slack. So this is all going in the right direction. Okay. And at the same time, Anthropic is moving big time. And Anthropic is now explaining that, well, their TAM is going to be the whole work, which I do find to be a big number, but which between you and I doesn't shock me.
Well, Dario, I don't know if you saw or heard that he apparently said that Anthropic would be the only private company in the world in 15 years. Gavin Baker went on a couple podcasts, said that. There was a bit of a rebuttal online. But I mean, the ambition is obviously there, right? But let's stay on something for a second on this whole seat-based versus consumption-based licensing. Let's just take again, just because it's an easy one for me to remember, the example of Slack, okay, and Salesforce. We know that, or I know, I guess, from just a number of conversations I've had, that it has been a challenge to unbundle or to bundle Slack into the Salesforce broad integration at enterprise level, because a lot of companies had a Microsoft house or, you know, a Google house, whatever it might be, and they had teams, and, you know, and it's very difficult to kind of convince somebody to unplug one piece and plug in another, right? Even when they're very happy, you know, and enthusiastic Salesforce users, at least they were, okay? So that whole opportunity to even like give it for free, right? Like I remember having this conversation at Dreamforce last year. Just you get that early, win that market early, right? But it never truly happened. Okay, how easy do you think it is to claim or to reclaim your stack, like, and to reimagine like an enterprise agreement? Like, who do you think the TAM is for this? Do you think that Salesforce should be going out to like their mid-cap SMB business, trying to like basically position, you know, this opportunity as more consumption based, or are you trying to completely work with like long-time enterprise customers and reimagine what the whole infrastructure should look like?
Well, I think that this is effectively a profound architectural, you know, I like this word, architectural reorganization of the IT Slack. And last year at Dreamforce, Mark Benioff had said, this is going to take time. You don't rewire an enterprise stack like in 2 weeks. That's wrong, and that doesn't exist. So let's put that aside. This is taking time, and this is taking time by putting the pieces together. So the piece that we had initially was the system of record. Okay, that's an interesting starting point. Now we have where does work, not where does work get done, where does the intention of getting work done get expressed by both a human, you and I, or an agent. Now, Slack is one example of that. Microsoft Copilot is another example of that. Senna is a third example, and of course, Claude and Claude Code, specifically Claude Code, is a perfect example. That point is a structural moat for any company trying to have this position clearly. And it doesn't happen overnight. I think that you raise an interesting point, which is the pricing of Slack, and of course, I do not have information into that, but it would make sense for Salesforce to have Slack being really the wedge, being, okay, this is deep place where intent gets expressed, human and agentic one, and then work gets funneled to whatever source of intelligence, to the record that is written over, amended, and creates the loop, etc. So that is a very structural position with everyone claiming for that. So then how do you monetize that? I think it's a question that is not as important as, do you have that strategic position, or are you called upon by whatever company is going to have that? Remember when QuickBooks ceded that position to ChatGPT? I think it was over 1 year ago. You say, oh, this is great. I have now massive distribution. I have ChatGPT, I have Claude who's going to distribute QuickBooks. But that's not so great because you're ceding your interface to intent to the LLM. So you want to be reversing that. You want to send work to the LLM, keep the interface. That's, I think, what is absolutely fundamental in winning this enterprise battle, if it's a battle. But I think it is a battle.
It becomes an engine as part of the operating system as opposed to actual throughput.
Exactly.
I want to talk about a couple of other interesting things that have happened since you were last on the show. So Oracle, I want to ask you about Oracle. Very interesting company, okay? Has had a pretty rough few weeks on the market. Mm-hmm. It's hard to underestimate Oracle because, you know, its founders, one of the most successful men in the entire world, has all the right relationships if you want to define success in a particular category, right? Like with folks like Musk and others, you know, but still is like suffering because I think there is a challenge as to understanding how the Oracle of 10 years ago, which really did do very well in enterprise, right? Like as a ERP and a number of levels, is going to compete with the future of this, frontier model driven, who knows, how we actually can describe it, type of enterprise, right? They don't really have a message to what the next 10, 15, outside of Oracle Cloud, which is also doing interesting, how that looks. Where do you think a company like that is going wrong? I'm so interested to understand.
Look, I think that when people think of Oracle, they first and foremost think about their infrastructure business, which has driven so much growth, OCI, but which is where everyone freaks out because there's so much debt, so much dependency to OpenAI. The numbers are impressive, but right now, it's much more of a burden than it is an opportunity. This is where we can see that the wind has changed, not over the past weeks, over the past year. Like in July, Oracle had very bad performance on the markets as the AI trade was questioned. So they actually have a very interesting software business. They do not have what I call this proximity to user intent. I'm not saying that to criticize Oracle. I think they have not evidenced that in a way like a Microsoft, Salesforce, or Workday has done for now. That's work in progress. And of course, the AI labs. So I would say they're kind of like, they have a strong architectural position from the database part where they come from. And they've done a ton of innovation on that part. They're not putting the pieces together where you say, oh, I'm going to have Oracle be my number one interface for all of the work that gets done in the enterprise by humans or agents. It's more like in the process, but it's not the first person or first tool that you see. And they have the burden of OCI, which I think is what everyone thinks about when they think of Oracle stock. It might be unfair, but it's the reality.
You know what's interesting when you say the fact that a dependency becomes a burden? There is no unilateral metric or definition for the turn-off point for that, though, right? Because in some cases, when we see this a lot in the kind of newer frontier side of the house, where you have a lot of very fast followers who form relationships with folks, and NeoCloud's a perfect example. They have situations where they have 70% of their entire revenue is with one hyperscaler. Yet the stock continues to go well, right? In some cases, it's very inconsistent. At what point it is that the markets view tight relationships and as a dependency and as an economic burden, as opposed to something that's seen as opportunistic.
I think we need to tie that to and this might change, but OpenAI, to be fair with OpenAI, because they're criticized, the critics against OpenAI are right now very abundant. I think they're doing a very good job in the enterprise, which we have always discussed here, is their only way to have a durable mode. And they've made great progress over the past weeks. Now, that being said, I think OpenAI is causing a lot of stress. When you think of OpenAI, you think of, wow, okay, the growth may be impressive, though we don't really know the numbers. The losses are huge. How is all of this going to be financed? So I think any company that is strongly linked to OpenAI, which is not the case for Anthropic, which is still seen very positive, but that might change. Everything changes so fast. Right now, when you're associated to, I have a big dependency on OpenAI, I would say that for the past months, if not more, the market sees that as, okay, that might be a risk factor big time. I want to discount that. Just that's my perspective. I'm not representing the market. I'm sharing my perspective. And I think that this might change as Anthropic goes to IPO. As the numbers are going to be disclosed in the S1, we're going to have a first really in-depth view of what the economics of a frontier model company looks like. We had that with Minimax, we had that with Zaipu, but I don't know if US investors were digging into the S1 of Chinese open source models, though we had interesting points. This is the first time that we're going to really open the S1. Next week, maybe we'll talk about this next time. This could be in the next days, and see, oh, okay, so this is what it takes to grow. This is what we're talking about in terms of gross margins, in terms of operating margin. And that might be seen very positively, or that might be seen as, wow, we need to take a step back. Those numbers are absolutely crazy, and are we going to be able to finance this? So OpenAI is the poster child. So it's easy to criticize OpenAI. Again, I do think that they did not have a moat going in the direction that they were going before. And my point of view is not a good point of view on OpenAI. My point of view is OpenAI right now is showing meaningful traction in what matters. So to be followed.
It'll be very interesting to see what's in that S1 for sure, and hopefully we'll be able to actually break it down next week. But the early estimations and the early speculation, I mean, it is pretty crazy numbers, right? Like, you know, broadly speaking, like what are your thoughts? Do you think, again, we have another SpaceX? I mean, it's going to be even higher potentially, right? They're saying 4 trillion. Like, there's all sorts of numbers being floated around. Like, you know, again, as someone who's, you know, made your career on like investing money wisely, do you think that this is an overinflated bet broadly?
No, I think that we need to be asking the right questions. The right questions is not anymore, what is the growth of Anthropic? The question is, what does Anthropic become? Like, let's project ourselves 5 years from now, not even 10 years from now, just 5 years from now, maybe less. What does this company become? When we go back to what we were discussing at the beginning of the show, which is, does Anthropic need to become an enterprise software company? Or does Anthropic need to become what I have called the system of execution, which is, I would say, what software is in the agentic era? Because that's the way that Anthropic actually grows into its $2 trillion, maybe $3 trillion, maybe even more valuation. Why cap it at $2 trillion? It could be more. And this is where the whole notion of TAM gets into perspective. What really, I think, made me a bit mad with the SpaceX IPO was that we had this huge number, the 22.7 trillion on enterprise AI applications, with literally zero justification. So we were asked to believe that this company was addressing this huge enterprise AI market, and now I think the consensus is SpaceX is going to be the biggest neocloud, which I agree with from a consensus perspective, but this is not what was said in the S1. Remember, the S1 had a part of neoclouds which was like small. So I'm not the one who wrote the S1. My point is, the whole system right now needs a lot of coherence. You can believe in a crazy TAM, which again might not be so crazy a couple of years from now. And I think that a lot of people are bashing AI in ways. I'm not like a cheerleader with my pom-pom saying AI is great. I'm saying you need to really understand what is the change that is going on. If work gets done by agents and you augment throughput massively, you need to think differently around TAMs than as we think currently. So again, that may be credible even for SpaceX. I don't know. I think no one knows. What we want to know as an investor is, what is this company becoming? Is what it is telling us coherent with the numbers that we're seeing and what is in the S1? And are we able to not just believe what someone says, crazy numbers, but are we actually able to chart a path in terms of growth and profitability that makes sense from a fundamental point of view? This is what is missing in the market today.
I mean, on this, surprise, we're actually a neocloud debate. In some respects, you know, and I think we spoke about this at the time, SpaceX went to markets with this idea that, you know, we have infrastructure, but really we're an orchestrator. We are, you know, a leading AI like lab, right? And a lot of folks are like, well, actually, it's really an infrastructure play, moonlighting as something else. Anthropic is very much, we are like an orchestrator of enterprise. Like, that is their leading message. So if markets loved the SpaceX message being so focused on them, you know, as owning AI, like owning, you know, the kind of endpoint for customer value, then potentially Anthropic is in a very good place. But again, who knows? When you talk about fundamentals, like, who truly knows? I want to go on to something, though, that I also think is an interesting conversation, and that is, you know, in NYSE Wired, we interview a lot of founders, right? We talk to folks across the gamut of health tech, biotech, enterprise tech, fintech. All, you know, we might do 30 interviews a week sometimes. And one pattern I've really noticed is there is a lot of money being spent on that vertical application layer, on startups that are investing heavy. They're not trying to be Anthropic. They're trying to be a very niche player, okay? They're not trying to replace everything. They're not saying you can, you know, remove your entire stack. They're saying, no, we are going to be the best at underwriting. We're going to be the best at this particular, you know, very niche space. And it's interesting to me because in some respects, a lot of these SaaS companies are kind of getting throttled for having like this vertical agenda, right? Where that vertical agenda lines up to payroll. Let's say Workday is a great example.
Yes.
HR benefits, whatever. But these new companies that are like challenging the incumbents are getting a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of venture dollars. What are your thoughts there? Like, where do you think that the thinking breaks a little bit around, well, you can't do that because you've been doing it for too long and you haven't really created a defensible moat, but you can, even though it's your first ever company and you've got $40 million to do it.
So that's a fascinating debate, and I would say it goes back to, okay, if you think about software, and we had introduced that distinction when we talked about Figma a couple of months ago, is you have those backbones. So you have those platforms, the Salesforce, the Workday, ServiceNow, Microsoft. Let's qualify those as like the platforms or horizontal software, to take a term that I do not like. And then you have vertical, which is I'm addressing a specific industry. I'm Appfolio, I'm Viva Systems, I'm Guidewire, so companies that are addressing a specific like workflow in a certain domain. And the AI native startups are going like full speed in that. They're really saying we're going to be building what they call these autopilots, meaning agents that can perform work faster, better, quicker, and that are working quite well. Harvey this week unleashed, released. It's not yet general availability, but it was very interesting research where they showed that by really fine-tuning the model, they were able to have amazing results in the field of legal, which is one of the fields that is attracting the biggest fundraising, like Legora, Harvey, so many other companies like Thomson Reuters that announced their own large language model. So that field, that with finance, is moving big time. So I do think that a lot of those companies will build very successful businesses. I do think that they have an advantage coming from, we are born agentic AI native. We are born AI native. And this is where we go back to the SaaS apocalypse. The SaaS apocalypse is over only for those companies that are either a platform converting into this new system of execution, which we mentioned, or the domain specialist, workflow specialist companies that are not this platform and that are moving very fast against the clock that is ticking against those AI natives. There will be, I think, a lot of casualties in the specific part, because it's exactly what you're saying. When you haven't been able to build strong retention, when your product is not the product that people want right now, when your UI has not been reinvented, maybe you have regulations that protect you. Those businesses will stick around for a while. But if you're in a sector that is not like where you need to have the CRM, where you need to have this thing in insurance, I would be a bit stressed. I
have the same, I suppose, question about this that I do about cyber companies too, right? Which is no CTO, no buyer wants to manage another license, even if it's consumption-based. It's just another line item on your P&L, something else to monitor, right? Like when we think about vertical application, as much as I love the enthusiasm, I think it's so important within tech that we have this energy, and it's great to see because we need challengers all the time. I just think about that kind of, simplification, mass integration thesis that we've come to really see as what people want as much as they can possibly have. And it makes me question, the longevity of some of that thinking. But you know what? I actually hope they're successful because, like I said, we need competitive market dynamics, right? And there's going to be a ton of M&A. We're seeing that already. Well, that's the thing too. I think, yes, there's a lot of enterprise fatigue where it's true. And it's interesting to see that platforms like ServiceNow, like Salesforce, like Workday have moved into domains that were not their initial domains, like that have gone from ITSM to HR, from HR to CRM. So we've already seen like a ton of that last year. I think there's going to be so much M&A of these AI native, agentic native companies that are going to be brought to offer like a more broader platform, combined with companies that are going to be building their own agents. I mean, we're starting to see a lot of that. Like companies are going to not even have to go either to an AI native company or to platform, but they're going to be able to plug their own cloud-built agents, OpenAI-built agents on top of this enterprise backbone that may be Microsoft, that may be Salesforce, that may be Workday, I don't know. And this is moving fast. And Anthropic goes to IPO in this context and has to prove even faster that
they're going to be the winners.
You know, I think what you say there, one thing that I really find interesting, and I have a real, I guess, bee in my bonnet about this, is this whole marketing message of AI native, right? What it means to be AI native. Like, and I think in a lot of respect, that also is causing some of this confusion. And I know we talk a lot about, you know, how I think that tech has a marketing problem, but I certainly think it should be true. Raphael, I know we're up on time. I think we're going to hear from NVIDIA in about 10 minutes. So I'm sure you've got a little bit of trepidation. So much happening. Thanks so much for joining us. I look forward to catching up in 2 weeks.
For sure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching AGNT. We are talking about the agentic moat of this next year in tech. Stay tuned for next time.